Hello, and welcome to the Current Science and Technology podcast from the Museum of Science in Boston. I'm your host, Susan Heilman, and every week we bring you interviews with guest researchers and our museum staff covering science and technology in depth. Today's podcast is all about nanotubes, quantum dots, and nanobiology. With me, President, Co-founder, and CEO of Nanocomp Technologies, Peter Antoinette. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm doing much better now, thanks.
Great. Super.
So the title of your talk today was really intriguing, and it was about nanotubes heading to outer space. And
That's
so
right.
Just in and of itself, that's incredibly intriguing. But before we get into the cool outer space part, why don't you give us your quick definition of what a nanotube is?
Oh, nanotube is a rolled-up single layer of graphite, relative of diamond, and looks just like a chicken wire roll, very tiny though, the diameter DNA, and really long, maybe microns long, so that these individual tubes have remarkable properties of high strength, high conductivity, and lightweight. So they've been looked forward to for the last 20 years to be the great advance in advanced materials.
And how prominent are they right now? We've talked about them on this podcast a lot, and people have heard of them. How prevalent are they in our everyday use?
Well, right now I think the nanotubes had only minor use in some sporting goods. But they're at that inflection point. A local company here out of Woburn called Antero manufactured and flew nanotube-based chips on the space shuttle a year ago. We're involved with taking nanotubes and turning them to industrial scale wires, cables, and composites. So I think we're on this now cusp of going from the lab, the long-held promises in the lab, out into industry.
And what's special about your particular company, and what do you do better than others in making nanotubes?
Initially, we figured out how to grow really long carbon nanotubes, a millimeter long. And so the difference would be if you took a traditional nanotube and made about a foot wide, it would end about 2 miles away, which is pretty long. If you took the same for ours, it would end about 200 miles away. And that long length imparts the properties at macro scale that people have been looking for in industrial products.
Because the longer it is, the more interactions you can have between more of the different nanotubes.
Exactly. I use a Home Depot example. If you go to Home Depot and buy chipboard that's really short wood fibers, you got a lot of glue, you can break it over your knee. Go to get the oak with really long wood fibers, you're not breaking it at all. Same thing at the nanoscale. Really long fibers, really strong. Really short fibers, not so strong.
And nanotubes are pretty much by definition, they're it's a very, very strong material.
By definition, totally at the nanoscale. Always the challenge has been, how do you get those properties at the macro scale?
Right.
That's been the biggest challenge.
Okay, so now that we have a little bit better of an idea about Nanocomp and about nanotubes here, what did you mean by sending them to outer space?
Well, everybody thinks about space, I think about a space elevator where you're going to have a giant cable and haul things up and down.
That's exactly what I thought of when I saw it.
And that probably works on maybe if you went on the moon where you don't have an atmosphere and you don't have planes flying around underneath it. We're actually integrating nanotubes into spacecraft. We are in wires and cables. We've actually launched and orbited satellites with nanotube wires and cables. Why do they want to do that? A third of the weight of the satellites are in copper wire, in 1851 technology. We can save half of that weight. So on the Hubble spacecraft, a 10-ton spacecraft, you had tons of copper wire. That costs $20,000 a pound to take it from the ground into orbit. Save 1 ton, we really know what money savings can be, and it's dramatic.
So where on things in outer space have you put wiring, or you've also, I think, made sheets?
With the sheets, yeah, we are been integrated into the Juno spacecraft. The Juno is going to be NASA's most ambitious launch of a spacecraft to Jupiter. It's a big spacecraft. Our sheets are being used to protect the engines and the thrusters from electrostatic discharge, from radiation, and even micrometeoroids. So we're out there helping the spacecraft to get there in one piece because it takes 5 years to get to its mission, and then 1 year a mission around Jupiter. So we're really pleased to be on the really critical components there to help.
Yeah, that's really cool, and that's all, again, it's not just because it's lightweight, which is a bonus, but can you not get these properties from other types of shielding?
It improves it, yeah. Okay. The shielding is there, but what it lets it do is over long periods of time, the weight with improved performance is what the program managers are looking for. And you think about it, they take chances when they adopt a new material onto a very, very sophisticated, expensive spacecraft. So you have to have profound performance benefits, and we were able to do that.
Right. So you must have some of your carbon nanotubes in space right now?
They were orbiting in a CubeSat satellite that has since re-entered, and we're being installed on some very large national satellites for launch this year.
Cool. And you mentioned also International Space Station?
Well, we're on the next space shuttle.
Okay.
Maybe it's the last space shuttle. We're on the next one.
Second to last,
yeah, second to last. So we're on that, and they're going to be installing samples on the outside of the space station for long-term testing in radiation, in sunlight, and then they'll bring them back 2 years from now, and we'll all see exactly how these materials work. It's part of a standard program that NASA's been running for the last 4 years.
Oh, so it's not necessarily that you're even being used as part of the craft, but it's an experiment being done on your materials.
Exactly, and you have to do those experiments first. Right. You're not going to make a mistake on something like the space station or have a failure because repairs are kind of difficult. And so it becomes one of those things where it's got to work, and the space business is very conservative. So this is part of them getting that confidence to use these products now in a more regular basis.
Are they being used anywhere not in outer space right now?
We're really being evaluated in two areas, one for military craft and also for commercial craft. Boeing has been a company that's leading edge in terms of using composites for an airplane, and at the same time they keep trying to reduce the weight of that. On their latest aircraft, the 787, 8,000 pounds is the wire alone.
Wow.
Again, for them, if they can save weight on that wire, it saves fuel of literally millions of gallons. And they're quite interested in our lightweight cables because that is an immediate fuel savings potential for them. And so that's one of those areas. The other one is some of our earliest work has been for the military and body armor. These sheets that we're making are extraordinarily strong. And so we've been experimenting with various blends of our materials and current materials to decrease the weight of body armor and to increase soldier protection.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really cool to be doing that. So you've really got your fingers in a lot of exciting pies here.
Maybe too many pies.
No, definitely not. No, that's really exciting. And so are there any improvements that you're making to your product right now? I mean, you're not just cranking out the materials.
We continue to try to improve electrical conductivity and strength. But our biggest focus right now is to build a factory here in New England for the first time to create large volumes of carbon nanotube sheets and yarns. We're starting that this year. Where we're moving from our current 11,000 square foot facility to build a 100,000 square foot factory.
Amazing.
Where it would be literally the kind of thing you'd see in any manufacturing plant. And when we do that, it'll keep leveraging what we do so well here in the New England area, which is this really the nanotechnology center of excellence for the country in research. And now hopefully we'll do that in terms of manufacturing.
That sounds excellent. That's really exciting that you're doing. It sounds like a very fast-growing company, and the applications are just, well, sky's beyond the limit at this point.
Sky high, in fact, does apply.
Yes, it does. Well, thank you, Peter, for joining me here today.
I appreciate it very much, Susan. Thank you.
I have with me now Professor Moungi Bawendi from MIT, and he'll be talking about quantum magic, or he'll be talking about quantum dots and how they kind of look like they're magic. Hello, Professor Bawendi.
Nice to be here.
So if you could just give us a brief overview, what is a quantum dot? I know it has something to do with being on the nanoscale, so really, really small, but what is a dot?
Quantum dot is a very tiny crystal that's got a few hundred to a few thousand atoms in it, and the dimensions are on the nanometer scale, a billionth of a meter.
So what's so special about
What's special about them is that at that scale, electrons don't behave like particles the way we're used to in wires and circuits. Instead, electrons, when you stuff them inside a quantum dot and they can't get out, they behave like waves. So the power of quantum mechanics comes in there. Instead of being described by regular mechanics, quantum mechanics comes in there. And it's the wave properties of the electrons that give rise to the magical colors that come out of quantum dots.
Okay, so that's the magic we're talking about here.
That's the magic of quantum mechanics.
You showed a video before, hard to obviously replicate on an audio podcast, but basically you had these bright colors, and as this mixture heated, it essentially changed colors, even though you didn't add anything different to it.
Right, it's the same material. We grew the quantum dots in the mixture. They get bigger and bigger, and as they get bigger, the color changes. And the color changes because the electrons that are in there have a bigger box to be in. And because they have a bigger box, they have bigger wavelengths or longer wavelengths. And that translates into deeper colors.
Because it's the wavelengths of the electrons that translate into the wavelength of light that it...
Right.
Is it emitted?
It's easier to explain when it fluoresces. So if I take a quantum dot and I energize it by either shining UV light on it or sending electricity through it, I can take an electron in there and make it be this energetic wave. And the length of the wave, or the length of the box, then is reflective of the energy that that electron has. Just like if you have a string, a guitar string, and you make it shorter, then the vibration on the string create a higher pitched sound than if the string is longer. There's more energy in a higher pitched sound than there is in a lower pitched sound. In the same way, the vibrations or the wave-like properties of the electron when the wave is small have more energy than when the wave is long. And so the light that comes out when the electron releases its energy is bluer for the smaller waves and redder for the longer waves.
So quantum magic, in this case, is really just obeying the fundamental principles of quantum mechanics.
That's right. It's quantum mechanics in action. Usually you don't think of quantum mechanics as being able to just see it.
Right. So what do you now do with this really cool fluorescent colors emitted by these quantum dots? As beautiful as they are, do you just look at them, or are they useful?
So they turn out to be more useful than we expected. And the first application was completely unexpected. It was in biology. It was in tagging cells and other biological objects with the quantum dots and using the light from the quantum dots to image these cells and to image receptors on cells and to image neurons. And now we're using them in vivo in animal experiments and research on cancer, for instance, to image the biology of cancer, to try to understand the biology of cancer.
And how do you actually target these quantum dots to a specific area? I mean, you're just going to throw quantum dots in a body.
That's a very good question. That's a lot of work. A large part of my group works on the chemistry of putting things on the surface of the quantum dots to be able to specifically target the parts of the cell that we want to target or the parts of the tissue we want to target. Putting antibodies on the dots, for instance.
Okay, so you can do that.
You can do that. You can attach antibodies, you can attach different proteins, DNA, whatever you like on the surface of the dots, and that's what we use then to target the different parts of the cell, for instance.
Cool, okay. And there's other things, I imagine, other than imaging in biology that these dots can be used for?
Sure. We can go completely out of biology and go into electronics and optoelectronics, which is where people thought the first application was going to be, as lasers, for instance. And that turned out to be much, much harder than expected. But it turns out that the ability of quantum dots to shift light from one color to another, which is basically what we're using in biology. We're using blue light to excite the dots, and the red light comes out, and that's what we use to image the cells. That same property of shifting light from one color to another can be used, for instance, in lighting or displays. By using blue light to power the dots, we can create any color light that we want. So, for instance, in lighting, the future of lighting is LED lights. Mm-hmm. LED lights are based on a blue LED, and then you have to shift the color of the blue LED to the colors of the rainbow. And with traditional phosphors, you can really only do it efficiently by shifting down to the yellow or an orange. And so it's very hard to keep the efficiency up and have red light as part of the rainbow of the colors.
So you get kind of a cold white light.
You get a cold white light instead. It's missing the red. And so if you shine that on your skin, you don't see any blood. You look like you're a ghost.
Right.
But the dots, because they have very narrow colors and they're very efficient at shifting the color from the blue to the red, they can be added then to the LED to warm up the LED, to make it look like the color from an incandescent light, like the sun.
So adding in quantum dots that will give off red.
That will give off red, right. To add back the color that's missing so that it becomes pleasant, so that we want to use it instead of incandescence.
Right.
So we have to make sure that it's a warm color that you want to use in your house.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention that you're working on in lab?
So a lot of people are working on trying to make solar cells out of these quantum dots as well.
Cells.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just at the beginning of the research. There's many years to go before we understand the limitations or the potential of using quantum dots in solar cells. And so we're working on some very fundamental science right now on trying to understand how one might create low-cost, flexible solar cells using quantum dots.
Wow, so your research, and it's your lab that's doing all of these different areas. So you have biologists and physicists.
We
and
collaborate
chemists
with a lot of people.
Yeah,
The wonderful thing about being in the Boston area is that you have so many institutions and so many people that are willing to work with you, and it is just a lot of fun to be here. But the students do have to cover a lot of ground. That's true.
Absolutely, but it's amazing that this material, these quantum dots, can cover all of that material.
Makes it fun.
It really is magical.
Yes, truly magical.
Thank you very much for joining me here today.
My pleasure.
Next, I have with me Dr. Pamela Silver from Harvard Medical School to talk about building with biology. Could you start with some examples of things that nature does very well that humans might like to copy in some way?
So the examples I like to use to demonstrate the areas where biology parallels engineering but does it very well include, for example, the exquisite sensitivity of biology, which you can observe in for example, the olfactory system. Your nose is capable of sensing single molecules of odorants, so it's exquisitely sensitive. The other thing that biology does is it can send signals very specifically and very rapidly through, for example, nerves. And biology, like engineering, is modular. The gene is a modular unit, but within genes, we know that there are further modular units, such as the region that encodes the protein, the regions that encode control elements for whether genes are expressed or not. And also, biology is capable of capturing sunlight and using it for energy. And lastly, biology is capable of self-replication, which is something that engineering can't do yet.
What have humans gotten from copying things that we've seen in nature?
Well, there has been an attempt to synthesize a cell by the Venter Group, where they completely tried to make synthetic DNA that corresponded to the genome of a very small bacteria, and they successfully did that. Now, that is a copy of what nature has made. So that's not a novel bacteria, it's a copy.
Right.
So that's an example. And then there are more sophisticated examples that are sort of different. For example, people who try to make artificial retinas. They try to mimic the retina. And then somewhere in between, there are scientists who try to reconstruct life in a test tube. And by life, I mean trying to make cells that will divide from chemicals.
Right, kind of like the primordial ooze type experiments.
Right, exactly.
And so in your lab, you're also trying to mimic something that you've seen in biology and use it for the benefit of humans. So you probably have many projects. What's some of the projects that you're working on?
Right. Well, one of our favorites is trying to use sunlight or light and use bacteria that are capable of doing photosynthesis or harvesting sunlight, which is one of our greatest natural resources, and at the same time fix CO2 and have them produce things such as fuels or what we call high-value commodities such as sugar or drugs. And the idea here is that this could bypass the need for petroleum. So many of the things that we use in our day-to-day life, or many of the chemicals that we use, require intermediates that come from the refining of petroleum. But these organisms are like little catalysts in that they can take sunlight and CO2 and do lots of things. And so we're trying to entrain them to make useful things.
Such as like sugar or plastic?
Well, sugar is our favorite right now because we succeeded at that, and sugar is becoming more and more valuable, of course, because it is the feedstock that is used by other organisms to produce biofuels.
Right,
so
right.
Normally, the alternative strategy, of course, is to get the energy, the carbon source from plants, but the United States is not optimally set up for that.
It's not quite renewable yet.
Brazil, for example, they grow a lot of sugarcane there. They also have constant temperature and sunlight, so they don't have to, they can do something like 3 crops a year. So they're sort of the
ideal situation for it. So is making the sugar something that the bacteria naturally does, and you're just trying to make it a more streamlined process and harvest it, or?
Yes and no. The bacteria, you can induce them to make a certain kind of sugar. The problem with these kinds of bacteria is that they are called autotrophs, which means they don't really interact very much with other cells. And they live in the ocean, for example, free swimming. So what we can do is put special proteins in them so that they will pump the sugars out of them.
Okay.
So that you don't have sugar just trapped inside the cell. That's one thing.
Okay.
The second is that they only make certain kinds of sugar, and so we introduce other proteins that can modify the sugars further to produce some of these other kinds of sugars or molecules.
Okay. So another project you were about to mention.
So we have a large project that is funded by the Department of Energy, where instead of using photosynthetic bacteria, which have potentially certain problems because they have to be exposed to light, and so surface area may become a problem. So we have another project where we are trying to look at other kinds of bacteria that are called extremophiles, and some of these bacteria are capable of conducting electricity.
Wow.
So that means that they could get their energy source from just about anywhere. You could use wind, you could use solar, and the bacteria don't necessarily have to be exposed to the environment. They could be contained. They just have to be able to conduct electrical current and fix CO2 and then produce, for example, a transportation-compatible fuel.
Yeah, because biology's already doing it right. Why reinvent the wheel?
Right. And it's potentially recyclable. It's sustainable. It doesn't require petroleum products if we do it right.
Well, it sounds like your lab is going to have a big part in that.
We hope so.
Well, thank you, Dr. Silver, for taking the time in order to speak with me today. It's definitely an interesting perspective of how to use biology to create technology.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to convey these ideas to the general public.
That's it for this week's show, but be sure to come back next time for more of the latest in science and technology. This podcast is a production of Current Science and Technology at the Museum of Science in Boston, part of the Boston community for over 175 years. For more information, visit our website at www.mos.org/CST or email us at podcast@mos.org. Thanks for listening.